Alright guys, welcome to the first weekly recap of the Tau Fantasy Hockey 2015-2016 season. What we're going to do tonight is I will go through all of the matchups from last week, sort of do a little bit of analysis. I want to keep this kind of short since I'm starting so late, but it'll be good. And then I'll make some predictions for this week's matchups, who I think is going to win based on last week's performances, as well as just my general hockey knowledge. So before we get started, however, I'm a little bit thirsty. Can't really talk about hockey, and I got to get something to drink. On my way home from work today, I actually stopped at the fine Latino liquor store on my way home, and I got a nice bottle of Barefoot Bubbly there. It's a Moscato Spumante blend. Very, very nice, very fine vintage there. Yeah, I'm just gonna get a drink really quick. So. I just thought it'd be good to... hey, by the way, for those of you who didn't see it all yet, alright. Okay, so now that we got that done... Alright, so now that we got that done, let's go ahead and look at some of the matchups for this week. The first matchup I'm going to talk about this week was Kyle versus Andy, and I'm dubbing this matchup as the why the fuck are both of these guys still in the league matchup. For the most part, this played out like any normal fantasy hockey matchup does. Kyle, for the most part, took most of the skater categories, whereas Andy really was dominant in terms of the goaltending categories. However, goals, assists, points, and shutouts were all pretty close. One of the biggest differences here was that Kyle's team was a little bit more consistent, whereas Andy's team, his stars really stepped up and they really led the way, whereas Kyle's team, like I said, was a little bit more of like a scoring by committee. Something worth noting is that Marc-Andre Fleury is actually playing a lot better than a lot of people give him credit for. In recent years, he's had trouble with winning bigger games, and I think that tarnishes his reputation a little bit, but he's getting it done right now on a Penguins team that's not scoring very well. Sidney Crosby hasn't been showing up at all, so it's interesting to see Fleury play that well. And as for Andy's goalies, Elliott, Miller, Smith are all playing really well, and Jason Spezza had a huge week for Andy this past week. The biggest gaps in this matchup were in shots, hits, wins, GAA, and save percentage. So, yeah, I don't know what else to say about this matchup. It was pretty boring. It was the closest one. Kyle lost. Very, very not interesting. Alright, our second matchup this week is the battle of what I'm calling My Name is Better Than Yours in Brian versus Ryan. And when I first just did a quick little overview of this matchup, I realized that both teams' stats just across the board were pretty lackluster. I'm not really impressed all that much. There's not really a whole lot to talk about here, so what's going to be more interesting is how both of these teams are able to try and turn it around this week to see what it's like to play against another full caliber top shelf team. Alright, combined, Brian's goalies had 4 wins, but his GAA, his saves, his save percentage are all just off. I don't know what was going on there. His team did have 101 hits and 81 blocks, which were both second best league-wide, so it's interesting, I guess. Somehow Ryan managed to steal assist, points, PIM, and power play points from Brian, and I don't know how he did that because he didn't set his roster for, I think, pretty much the whole week. It makes me wonder what his stats would have actually looked like had he set his roster every night. Our third matchup for tonight is what I call the what the fuck is going on here matchup. This, of course, was between Willis and Greg, and I call it the what the fuck match because I have no idea what's going on with either of these two teams. For the most part, for Willis, this was a bloodbath. Besides shots, blocks, and saves. Besides Stamkos, everyone on his team just absolutely shit the bed. Oh my god, your goalies are playing so fucking terrible right now. How is this happening? There's no way that I would have predicted this would have happened to your team after the draft. Everyone knew that Talbot was going to have a hard time in Edmonton, but nobody thought that Bobrovsky was going to shit the bed so hard this early in the season. And Rask, we all knew that Boston was due for a collapse due to like salary cap and all that, but Rask is just not playing as himself. And while we're talking about goalies, Greg's goalies are okay, but why does he have Keith Kincaid on his team? I can understand keeping Kincaid around if you want the occasional start when Schneider's going to get the night off, but you didn't even play him last week. I mean, he's got 2 starts already this season, and you don't have any stats registered for him, so he's just eating up a roster position, and you're not playing him. In terms of star power this week, Greg got a lot of help from John Tavares, Zach Parise, Nathan MacKinnon, but Willis didn't really have too much to rely on, and right now, the top point scorer on his team is Gabriel Landeskog. You know that when Landeskog's your top guy, your team's in trouble. That's not good. All right, our 4th matchup for tonight is one that should have been a huge matchup, and the end result was not exactly as close as people thought it was going to be. What we had here was what I'm calling the upset of the week, and I think everyone will agree with me on that, in Jordan versus Chris. The final score was 9-2 in favor of Jordan. I didn't think anybody was going to think that was going to happen. Chris was the runner-up of last year's Cup final, and I gave him the highest rating on the draft report cards. And I gave Jordan the second lowest. Jordan was instantly pretty pissed off at me about that, and it looks like Jordan is starting to prove me wrong, which is something that happens every fantasy season. There's always at least 1 or 2 or sometimes 3 guys that do that. Jordan's biggest gripe with my report card was my underrating of Martin Jones and how late he picked him up. Jones was a good bargain when you picked him up for sure, but given how unproven he was in the NHL, I don't think anybody ranked him as high as he needed to be, especially on the Sharks, they're a team that's due for collapse sometime soon. And I think everyone will agree with me that no one thinks that Jones can keep this up. The point is this: myself and a lot of other people don't think that Martin Jones can keep up this sort of a pace through the entire season. So he's due to regress at least a little bit. I don't think he'll go full-blown, start letting up like 4 or 5 goals every night, but he's gonna regress a little bit at some point. And like I said, if you actually look closer at the final tallies and all the categories, this matchup was a lot closer than what the final score dictates. This matchup actually had the most tied categories of all the matchups. Chris and Jordan managed to tie in both PIM, which is not totally uncommon, but kind of rare. They also tied in blocks, which is very strange. That usually doesn't happen. What's most scary is that between Chris and Jordan's teams combined, they both had the most wins in their goaltending categories as well as the most saves compared to all the other matchups across the board. And in both wins and saves, it wasn't even close with any other 2 teams. Sorry, I just gotta hits the spot. All right, and our 5th matchup is my matchup against Noah's. I'm gonna make this one quick since I don't like talking about myself, and I know you guys don't want to hear about how awesome I am, even though we all know that I am. Basically, I crushed every single skater category. The closest that Noah came to stealing a skater category away from me was an assist, but I still beat him by 3, which is close, but not that close. Both Steen and Wheeler had big weeks for me. They had 7 points each. Noah's biggest point scorers were Hossa and Weidman with 4 points and 5 points. And that basically sums it up. I won the matchup 10-3. Moving on. And finally, we have this week's Belt Match Title Weekly Challenge, whatever the fuck I'm going to end up calling this thing. I don't know. It's still up in the air. But it was Mark versus John. John's team got big performances this week from Tarasenko, Kane, and Turris. That really helped his team to surpass Peach's team in basically dominating the skater categories. And like I said in Mark's draft report card, I'm not too keen on his goaltenders. I already talked about how Devin Dubnyk, I think, is going to regress this season, and then Jake Allen is going to be playing second fiddle to Brian Elliott. Both had identical save percentages of .887 and GAAs of .302 and .303, respectively. Those are not stellar goaltending stats. But despite all that, at some point, Mark's team was actually winning this matchup. I think it came on like Wednesday or Thursday or Friday night, but at one point, he was actually like 2 categories ahead of John. And I was thinking in my head, like, oh man, this would be awesome if he came back and upset John. But in the end, that lead was very short-lived, and as I'm sure you can see on the results of the league homepage, John was victorious. So, John, congratulations, you are the new weekly belt champion. You will be defending it this week for the first time. Speaking of stuff happening this week, let's do some predictions really quick. This week's first matchup is myself versus Brian, and the two or the matchup between the two biggest Devils fans. I'm going to go ahead and take the homer answer and just say that my team is probably going to win. Brian, I'm going to beat you down. Next, we have Mark versus Ryan, and I'm going to give Ryan a slight edge. I was not impressed with Mark's team last week, and I think Ryan can muster up enough strength to have a rebound and get a victory this week. Next, we've got Noah versus Jordan, and I'm going to put 1,000-to-1 odds on Noah's team this week. I'm pretty sure Jordan's going to mop the floor. Then we've got Kyle versus Chris. I think Chris's team is due for a big bounce back this week. He faces an opponent in Kyle that's not very well suited to deal with the strategy that Chris is implementing, so that's an easy call. And then we've got Andy versus Willis. I'm pretty sure that I'm taking Andy on this one. And then finally we have John versus Greg, and this is going to be a very interesting match. I think it's going to be very, very close, but I'm giving the slightest, smallest edge to John right now. I looked at this for a little while, maybe longer than I should have, but I gotta give the slightest, smallest, most minute advantage to John on this one. So that does it, you guys. I hope you enjoyed this recap. If we like this new format more, I can maybe do it more often. Last year we did a lot of writing, and it was a lot of fun where we passed the spotlight around and let different people write different weeks. I'm not opposed to doing that as well. Maybe we can do a video every, once a month or something like that. I don't know. Let me know what you guys want to do. Let me know how you think we can make it all better. And I'm looking forward to this week.